Hello, my name is Benjamin Hart. I'm an American attorney and the managing director of Integrity Legal here in Bangkok, Thailand. Now, those who watch this channel and you sort of watch some of my personal stuff that I've kind of reincorporated into this channel because, especially with this BRICS stuff and everything, it's starting to have real pertinent impact on the day-to-day here in Thailand and how everything's going to work. I expect it'll have a major impact on international trade and international trade regulation. These videos, I do understand, they're kind of dry and they're not exactly the subject matter that most people really like to dive into, but this is important stuff. This is actually a pretty big deal what's going on here, and I've noticed that the punditry cast or class, if you will, mostly on FinTwit, sort of the financial, Twitter media, if you will, they've been talking about this, but I don't think they're really seeing what's going on here. Mostly because they're Westerners, quite honestly, and they're living and they're operating in the West, and quite frankly, it's clouding, in my opinion, their perspective. That said, let me dig into this and then we'll get into what I'm talking about here. Thought of making this video after reading a recent article from Reuters. It's Reuters.com. Article is titled, BIS to Lead China-Backed Central Bank Digital Currency Project. BIS is Bank for International Settlements. Now, we have talked about this a little bit on this channel. I've talked about it a lot and at length on my personal channel some time ago. Long story short, Bank for International Settlements has been working on this platform. Sometimes it's called a protocol. Protocol is probably the better way to look at it, as it's not like a physical platform. But this protocol that it's called mBridge. It's a protocol that is it's being created in cooperation between Chinese authorities, Hong Kong Monetary Authority, Bank of Thailand, and the Central Bank of the United Arab Emirates. And basically, and there's a joke. I'm going to put a link in the description below. It's to a Twitter. It's a Twitter link, an X link, whatever. And it's a podcast between a guy named Tom Luongo and a guy named Vince Lancey. I can never quite know how to pronounce his surname. I've had some interaction with both of these guys on the internet, and I think that they are very smart when it comes to their analysis, especially of more day-to-day levels of what's going on in terms of geopolitics. But they were talking about this recent development that BIS is backing out, if you will, of mBridge. I talked about it in a prior video as well. I don't think this is exactly even what they think it is, although they have a lot of really insightful stuff in that podcast, most notably the re-regionalization of certain types of currencies, including the dollar, the getting into like the different, if you will, motivations of all the different actors geopolitically with regard to what's going on with the creation of this mBridge protocol and how these interactions are sort of causing this thing to evolve. But what they're not seeing, in my opinion, is first off, I'm coming increasingly to the conclusion that the discussion of gold in the context of mBridge or any type of BRICS intra or inter sort of capital transfer sort of system involves gold. They've talked a lot about gold, but I'm coming increasingly to the position that Asia just deals with gold differently than the West, and the West really doesn't get it. It's like here in Thailand, the Thai gold shops, they operate like inverted banks, basically. Thais buy gold to save money and they keep the gold on them or in their house or whatever. And then when they need fiat, they go to the gold shop and they get fiat, they get cash, currency, if you will. This is different than the way the West does anything. And I saw this phenomenon most acutely when COVID first hit and the lockdowns all started. People needed money. They needed liquidity. Well, what did they do? We didn't need the government to go or specifically the central bank to just print money and create it and shoot it out into the system. No, Thais went to the gold shop and there were lines around the block in certain gold shops where they were going to change their gold back to cash. That was what they were doing. This is a very different dynamic than operates in the West. This is just a fact, okay? And I think it's the missing piece, and if Mr. Luongo or Mr. Lancey sees this video, I hope you understand. I was trying to make a point of this with one of them on Twitter, and I don't think I really articulated my point very clearly. And I want to be clear, I'm not articulating it clearly because even I don't fully understand the ramifications of all this. I'm trying to keep track of it as best I can. But one component the Westerners seem to be missing in their analysis is how the East deals with gold. It's very different than how the West deals with gold. So again, more and more, let me read the article and I'll do some further analysis. Quoting directly, again, BIS to leave China-backed central bank digital currency project, Reuters.com. The Bank for International Settlements said on Thursday it would quit the cross-border payments platform project mBridge, raising questions about how the scheme backed by China will evolve at a time of growing geopolitical scrutiny of global transfers. So what's going on here? Well, look, good, bad, and different. In 2022, effectively, the U.S. weaponized the dollar. When the whole Ukraine thing started, they seized Russian assets in the form of sovereign debt, sovereign currency holdings, and they just seized them. And they've denied access to the SWIFT system. This caused, obviously, a great deal of consternation in Russia, but it caused the rest of the world to say, hey, if they can do that to Russia, could they do that to us? And so that's causing sovereign nations, sovereign entities around the world to start looking for alternatives. The analysis here is not about sovereign reserves. I'm not getting into treasuries and sovereign debt. What we're talking about here more than anything, and the more pertinent point, is a means of transferring capital. Okay, not store of value, medium of exchange. Forget store of value for a moment. In my opinion, mBridge is purely about creating a medium of exchange, a platform or protocol whereby folks that aren't the United States can interact with one another, transact with one another without either using the dollar or the platforms associated with dollar transfers, things like SWIFT, for example, which to this point has been the unilateral method of moving large amounts of capital around the world. This is changing, whether Americans like it or not. Let me be clear and let me point out one of my personal biases. I don't like this. I don't think this is particularly good for America. You know, it's not particularly good for, what do you want to call it, the Pax Americana, the world order, the rules-based international order, sometimes referred to. Again, this isn't a particularly great thing for any of that. And quite honestly, I am an American. I was born there. And, you know, I'm not averse to any of that per se. Could it be improved? Sure. But do I want it to see the wholesale end of it overnight? Not particularly. Could this end it overnight? I don't think so. And again, I've discussed this in other videos. It's not a zero-sum game. But at the end of the day, this is important and it will change things. But I don't think folks are understanding what this is. This mBridge thing more and more is looking to me less like, hey, we're creating a currency. That's been, to my mind, maybe the red herring. These nation states don't really care about an idea or the idea of a notion of a new currency. And I don't know why the West is obsessed with it other than it just fits in their paradigm. They can't think beyond their own paradigm. And the last major move we saw in terms of geopolitical finance was the creation of the euro. The last big major move was the creation of the euro. So now I think in the Western mind, everything revolves around creating a new regional currency. I don't think that's what's going on here with mBridge. I think what all of these nation states over here in Asia want is they just want a medium of fair exchange, and they'll just go ahead and use their national currencies. One way to look at this, in my opinion, is to look at it as if these countries, most notably China, Hong Kong Monetary Authority, Bank of Thailand, and Central Bank for UAE, they're basically trying to create what I would argue is something akin to the TransferWise system as it exists now, except instead of it being basically a way of acting as a capital movement sort of coordinator within a commercial banking system, they're looking at it as the same sort of coordination platform, but between both central banks and commercial banks. That's the big difference here. And they're looking to do it in such a way that it has nothing to do with the dollar and nothing to do with the SWIFT system. So again, in a way, it looks to me like they're trying to create an alternative to SWIFT. And if you want to drill down even further, I think an even better analogy, or at least an easier analogy for most lay people, including myself, to understand is the notion that this is going to look a lot like TransferWise. Again, the difference being TransferWise right now mostly deals with commercial banks to commercial banks and sort of creates more efficient ways of moving capital between them. This system will operate between central banks and commercial banks. It will be a protocol that sort of weaves in and out in such a way that it avoids, again, the dollar and the SWIFT system. That said, quoting further, Project mBridge, a collaboration launched in 2021 between the BIS and the central banks of China, Hong Kong, Thailand, and the United Arab Emirates, was joined by the Saudi Arabian Central Bank in June. I can't stress that enough. That is a huge development, the fact that the Saudis are involved with the mBridge protocol. Meanwhile, again, stop thinking about this as creation of a new currency. Think of it as creation of a new protocol system. Again, I think TransferWise is a good analogy, at least for sort of working within my own mental framework. That said, quoting further, it also has many more observing members. Quoting further, BIS General Manager Augustin Carstens announced the step after being asked whether mBridge could provide a basis for BRICS countries, which include Russia, to get around international sanctions, a notion he rejected. Now, this is a direct quote from the head of the Bank for International Settlements. Quote, the BIS is leaving that project. So we noted that in another video. BIS is pulling out of the mBridge project. As I noted, I think that timing may be of an issue here too. If you go back under Obama, they put pressure on the guy that headed up SWIFT, and SWIFT is kind of similar to BIS. It's this sort of international, supranational, extraterritorial body. The head of the SWIFT at the time, when Obama put some pressure on him, wouldn't go along with weaponizing SWIFT. Years later, we get to Ukraine, Russia, and they went ahead and did it. Carstens is now saying, okay, BIS is going to pull out of dealing with this mBridge because of the sanctions and the whole Russia issue. But as I noted in a prior video, his term ends, I believe, this coming June or July. And we could see a similar scenario play out that we saw with the changeover in SWIFT, where policies changed when the head changed. Let's set that aside for a moment, because I think there's something even of more deeper significance and importance here. Again, quoting directly, and we're quoting directly from BIS General Manager Carstens. Quote, the BIS is leaving that project not because it was a failure or not because of political considerations, but mostly because we have been involved for 4 years. And this is key. And it is at a level where the partners can carry it on by themselves. Again, BIS may not be involved. They may just say, look, okay, we get it, there's sanctions problems. We just wash our hands of it. We don't even want to deal with it. But these other countries, they're looking for an alternative. And it looks to me like they found one, because it's working now. And BIS has said, we don't need to be involved with it anymore. It's working on its own. Those partners can carry it on their own. That's a pretty big deal. And again, I think this will have tremendous implications for international trade, both here in Southeast Asia and Greater Asia as a whole.